Okay, so notes, objectives at 11 and 12 have to do with equations, and the equations are standard and slope. So you've seen before y equals mx plus b, or the standard equation that has the x and the y together. But a lot of steps lead us up to getting into those equations, and so that's what these are. So that top one is slope, and this is actually, they call it, instead of like an exponent, it's called a subscript, so it's like below it. Okay, so this is x1, just meaning the first x, and then that's a comma, okay? And then y1, and then you have x2 and y2. And then when we're finding slope, it's rise over run, which you've heard of that before, so rise over run. And we get that by subtracting the y's over the x's. Okay, and then the next one is slope intercept, which is y equals mx plus b, and I'll scoot that down in just a minute after you get that top part. Okay, everybody got that top part, so you can see that down. Okay, so slope intercept, you have y equals mx plus b. The m, whatever's in front of the x, the m spot is your slope. Okay, and then whatever's in that b spot, and that's what that red is telling you, is where it crosses the y-intercept. So when we go to graph these, we do the y-intercept first, so that's why there's a 1 there. Okay, and that would be our first dot when we graph it. And then the second dot, from that first dot, you're doing your slope, which is rise over run. Okay, so that's what that 1 and 2 stand for. And then again, we'll practice this so that this makes some sense. Good. Okay, next slide. So standard form, so slope intercept and standard form are the two equations. So standard doesn't have y by itself. Slope has y by itself. So this will have the x and the y together on one side of the equation, and then it'll equal some number. Okay, and then point slope formula is y minus y1 equals m, and then parentheses x minus x1. And so these arrows right here that are pointing to that, those will be 3 numbers that you'll get that you'll plug into that equation. The rest of them will stay as variables. So where those red ones are at, those will be the ones we'll plug into. Okay, and then again, anytime there's an m, it means slope. Good? Okay, last vocab slide, and then we're going to actually start on the problems. Okay, so top one is parallel slopes. And when the slopes are parallel, then they are the same. They're equal. So example, if you had this and slope it, y equals mx plus b, m is the slope. Okay, so if whatever's in front of your x is equivalent, so 1/2 and 3/6 are the same fraction, okay, they're equivalent to each other, then I could say that these two equations are parallel to each other. Okay, and then perpendicular, they're not the same. They're actually flipped of each other. So slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. So the example that you have is a negative 1/2. So if I were to flip it and then change it to the opposite sign, then it would be 2. So another example is if we multiply them to get a -1, like your slopes, when you multiply them to get a -1, then it's because they're negative reciprocals of each other. We're good? Okay, so we're actually going to start the problems. And now this is just like the other one. They're like long sentences. So when I wrote this, I just put the pertinent information that we need to know, like which formula do they want, what are the numbers that we're using. I didn't write out the full sentence, okay? But when you get your notes, you'll be able to see like what they are, okay? Because I don't want you to have to slow down and write that. Okay, so problem number 63. And again, you're going to get a copy of these notes in just a minute. So number 63, they wanted us to find the slope of the line, and they gave us the coordinates that we need in order to find it. Okay, so you're going to write it. So 63, and the coordinates are 2, -8, and a -2, -7. Okay, so on this first one, we're going to do it both ways. I'm going to show you 2 ways, and they're both going to get the same answer. When you go to do this, you don't have to do it both ways. I'm just showing you, you choose which way is easier for you to get your answers, okay? All right, so starting off. So this is an x, this is my y, this is my x, this is my y. So if you refer back to where you have your slope definition, this would be my first x and my first y. This would be my second x and my second one. There's the first one they gave me, the second one they gave me. Okay, so if you look at the formula that you wrote, you had y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. With the y's on top. Don't think alphabetical and put x's on top. It's y's is the rise, and over run, which are your x's. Okay. So y2, so my y2 is a -7. The minus is part of the equation. It doesn't replace a negative that's attached to the number, so that's there. Okay, and then my y1 is a -8. Okay, if you start with your second y, then on the bottom you have to start with your second x. So my second x is a -2 minus my first x, which is 2. Okay, are we good to there where all those numbers came from? Okay, so now we just got to remember our rules of positives, negatives, and what do we do? Okay, so when I have a double negative, I change them to positives. Okay, so now I have a negative 7 and a positive 8, which would give me 1. Okay, signs are the same, so I'm actually going to add, right, and take the sign of larger numbers, so that's going to be a negative 4. Okay, so that is the slope. What is the letter that represents slope? Yeah. Okay, they didn't, if we were to use this and plug it into an equation, we'd put it in the x spot. Okay, but they just wanted slope. Okay, so I wanted to show you the other way. So I don't, when I read left to right. So I like to work with the first parentheses that I come across. Okay, so what I'm showing you, it doesn't matter if you start with the second one or the first one. Just make sure on the bottom it matches up. Okay, so because I read left to right, I go negative 8, so you're going to write this. So negative 8 minus my other y, which is a negative 7. Okay, so because I started with my first one, I want to start with my first x, and I'm subtracting my seconds. So as I read left to right, that's how I write mine. Okay, so simplifying this down, I've got double negative again. Okay, but this would give me what? Negative 1. Okay, on the bottom, I've got the two negatives next to each other, so they would change to a positive. So now it's 2 plus 2, which is, right, is this and that the same?
Yes.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter which one you choose, just make sure it's the y's. The y's on top over the x's. Just make sure they match up. Okay, because you should get the same answer. All right, done with our first one. So we found the slope. Okay, so on number 60, they gave us coordinates and they want us to write it in standard form. Okay, so if you look back at your notes, standard form has the x and the y together on one side. So that's how they want us to finish out, okay? But before we do that, we need to go through some steps to solve it, okay? So the very first step that I need to know is I need to find my slope, okay? So we're going to do what we just did in the last one, okay? So the first step is find slope. Okay, so which y do you want to start with? The 2 or the 4? 2. Okay, so I'm going to go 2 minus, what's my other y? 4. So because I started with 2, then that means below I have to start with the 7. So then it'd be 7 minus 8. Okay, so 2 minus 4 would give me a negative 2. 7 minus 8 would give me a negative 1. If I were to simplify that, that gives me what? 2 over 1 or just 2, right? Because 2 divided by 1 is going to be 2. We don't want to have to work with fractions if we don't have to. Okay, now again, what letter does that represent? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do that. Okay, so that's our first step. Our second step then is to plug it into the point slope formula. And the point slope formula is the y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Okay, and if you looked back at the formula when you wrote it, there's 3 spots that we plugged into because now we have those 3 numbers. So we're going to plug into that spot, and that spot. One, 2 boxes. Good. Okay, so I'm going to replace. I'm going to plug in and write my formula. So I've got y minus, what is my y1? What is the first y they gave me? 2, right? Because this is my first x, first y. So 2. I now know m because I just solved it in my first step, which is 2. And then x minus x1. What was the first x they gave me? What did you say? 7. Okay, are we good to there? where all those numbers came from. Okay, so now we just need to simplify and distribute. So I'm going to scoot this down. Okay, so the y minus 2, that's still there. Okay, I'm distributing this, so that gives me 2x minus 14. Okay, at this point, because we're going to go back and forth, they're going to say write it in standard or write it in slope-intercept. Okay, at this point, then you decide, do they want the y by itself, so it's in y equals mx plus b, or do they want the x and the y together on one side? Well, this one, they wanted the x and the y together on one side. So my last step is just to rewrite it so that I have it in the right format. Okay? So I need the x and the y to be together on the left side of the equation. Okay? So to do that, that means I would need to move this over to the other side of my equation. So it's going to change from a positive to a negative. Okay? So I have a negative 2x, it's still a positive y, minus 2 equals negative 14. Okay, so I'm almost there. I've got the x and the y together on one side. The only thing I need to move is now move that 2 to the other side, because I only want x and y on this side. Okay, so to do that, if I move this to the other side, it's going to change from a negative to a positive. Okay, so now I have a negative 2x plus y equals negative 12. And I'm done. Like, that's your standard equation, but we have to go through those steps to get to it, because we didn't have enough information just to write it. Okay, now, I want to clarify something. When you get to your multiple choice and your Kia, they will have either this one written, they'll have it written just like that, or they'll have switched the signs, okay? So this is the same thing as this. They just divided the negative 1 out, okay? If we were to actually go and graph this, we'd get the same one, okay? And I will tell you most of the time they write it without the negative, start with the negative. But everything has to switch signs, not just one of them, okay? Because you can't change part of an equation, it has to be all of them. Okay, next one. We're just going to draw a rough sketch. Okay, we're going to graph y plus x equals a negative 1. Okay, so we're going to see this is standard form. The x and the y are together on one side equals the number. Okay, so the easiest way, rather than to have to rewrite it to get the y by itself, because you can do that, I can move the x over and then I can use y equals mx plus b, is to plug in numbers in for my x and my y. And the easiest number to plug in is 0. Okay, you plug in other numbers, but then your graph might be like too far out. Okay. So I'm going to plug in a 0 for an x, and I'm going to plug in a 0 for a y. Okay, now I know those that are going to watch this video, it's not going to make sense to because I'm showing you with my hand, so hopefully they're going to get this. Okay, so this first one is the x, right? So if I were to replace this with a 0, really it's not there, right? Because it's not, if I add 0 or subtract 0, it's not going to change anything. So what is y equal to? Negative 1, right? Because if I put a 0 here and move it over to solve for y, it's not going to change that, what's on the other side. Okay, so I just cover it up, because 0 means it's gone. So I'm covering up y equals a negative 1. That's my y. Right. Well, it happens to be on this one. We don't have a number to divide it with. So now when I plug in 0 for y, my x is what? these coordinates. This is an x, y, and then I have two dots that I can connect. Okay, so my x is 0, so we start at the origin, and my y is a -1, so that means I'm going to go down. Okay, now graphing my second coordinate, my x is a -1, so I'm going to go to the left, and then I don't go up or down because it's 0, right? So that's going to be right there. And then you just remember it only takes two dots to make lines, and then we just connect it. Okay, if that thoroughly confuses you, the covering up and what happens if there's a number in front of it, we would divide, right? That would give us our second one. We can actually just rewrite this, okay? So I'm just showing you on this one. The other ones, you just make the choice, okay? So if I want to rewrite this, because I'm probably most familiar with this equation in all my math, where y equals mx plus b, this would be my first dot. This is what you have on where your vocab's at. That's my first dot, where it crosses the y-axis. And then from there, this is my what? Slope, which is rise over run. So to get the y by itself, I would have to move that x over to the other side, which would change it from a positive to a negative. So I have y equals a negative x minus 1. Good to there? Okay, so I'm just doing a different color, just so you can see that we wind up on the same line. Okay, so this is where it crosses the y-axis. So at the y-axis, I'm going to put a dot at a -1. Good? Okay. In front of the x is a negative what number?
1.
1. I can put any number to make it a fraction over 1, right? So if it was a -3, I could put it as -3 over 1 because we can make them into fractions. Okay, so from this red dot that I just made, this is my rise, and this is my run. Rise is the y direction, run is the x direction. So from this dot, am I going to go up or down?
Up or down?
Down, okay, and then my run is going to be to the left or the right?
Right.
To the right, okay, and then go. I can flip this, right, because this is the same thing, right? So I could have gone up one and to the left one. It's still, regardless, when you connect those dots, you're going to have the same one. Okay, this is garbage cans. It's not thunder, I promise. Okay, so you get the same one. Okay, so we're going to try it again. This one, they actually have it in y equals mx plus b. Okay, so just draw a small sketch. Okay, we graph that one first. So if you ever forget, you're looking back at your vocab, we put a number 1 here and a number 2 there. So we graph this first. That's where it crosses which axis? Y. So we're going to put a dot at a -1. So dot at a -1 on the y-axis. Okay, from there, this is your second dot, and it's slope. This is your rise. This is your run. Okay, so from this dot, up or down? Up 1, over 3. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. And we only need 2 dots. Rise over run. They're both positive, so within the positive direction. So you get your first dot from that dot, then you go up or down, and then left and right to get your second dot. Okay, 59. Okay, so they want us to write it in slope-intercept form. So that's the one that has the y by itself. We're going to use those coordinates, and they want it to be parallel to that equation. And again, this will be in sentence format when you get your notes, but I put all the important stuff that we need to know. Okay, slope intercept form, that means when we get done, we want it to be in y equals mx plus b form. Okay, so if you go back to the one that we did on standard, the first step was we needed to know the slope. Okay, we actually know the slope in this equation because they want it to be parallel to this equation. Is there slope in that equation? Which one? 4. So the 4 is slope, right? Because that's the m. And if it's parallel, then what do we know about the slope that they want? This one. It's also 4. Because parallel means the slopes are the same. So we actually have our first step done. Okay, so then the second step, this was our first step, our second step was to plug it into the y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, because we have the information to plug into those 3 spots. Okay, what is the y that they gave me?
-3.
-3, right? Here's your x, here's y. Okay, so it's -3. Slope, we just got it from the other equation because it's parallel, which is going to be 4. And what's our x? 1. Okay. Any questions on where those numbers came from? Okay, so now we just need to simplify this and get y by itself. Okay, so I've got a double negative, so those are going to change to a positive. So I've got y plus 3. And now we distribute 4x minus 4. I need to get y by itself, so what do I do? Subtract 3. So I need to move the 3 over to the other side and combine it with the other like term. So y equals 4x minus 7. And we are done. Okay, we're going to try it now for perpendicular, just to make sure we've got this. Okay. But we're going to do standard form this time instead of slope intercept, so that means the x and the y are going to be together. We want us to use the coordinates 1, -2, and it's perpendicular to the equation. Okay, so standard form does not have the y by itself. They want it to look like this. Okay, so our first step is, do we know slope? Okay, we do, but we're just not going to use the same one. If it was parallel, we would use the same one. They want perpendicular. So if you look back at your notes, the perpendicular has to be flipped, and then the opposite side. So if I take 1/7 and flip it, it's now going to be 7, but I need it to be a -7. It has to be the opposite. So -7. So we've got our first step. Okay, our second step is to plug it into the y minus y1. So I'm not going to write that formula out because you've already got it on it multiple times. So I'm just going to start writing the numbers. So that was our first step. So our second step is y minus what? -2. Equals m. Well, I got my m. And then x minus 1. And this is the y minus y1 equals m times x minus y. Good? Okay, now we're just simplifying it so that we can get it into standard form. Okay, we want to get the x's and the y's together on one side. So these guys are going to change to a positive, right? Distributing that's going to give me a -7x and a positive 7. I want it in standard, so that means I need to move this to the other side. So it's going to change from a negative to a positive 7x. The y stays there, so I'm not moving it. Okay, what's the other thing I have to move?
Transfer the 2.
I need to move the 2 to the other side, so it's going to change from a positive to a negative, which gives me 5. And now I'm done. So again, they like it to start with a positive, but the same thing would be a negative 7x, a negative y, and a negative 5 on the multiple choice when you do it, okay? Everything would have to switch. Okay, so parallel is exactly the same. Perpendicular, you flip it and switch the sign. That's your slope. Okay, the last one. See if you've got this. Ooh, good question. Yes, it is. So negative 5, negative 3, and it's perpendicular to y equals negative 3x minus 5. Okay, so just like the last one, standard form, we want the x and the y together on one side. Okay. Do I know slope? Yes. We just need to rewrite it because it can't be a negative 3. Okay, so remember we can make it a fraction by putting it over a 1, right? So we want to flip it and then change it to the opposite sign. So what is my slope? 1/3. Okay, that one was negative. I need this one to be positive, and I flip it. Okay? Okay. Y minus negative 3. Oops, I didn't need to write that. To my that's not there. X is next. Okay, and then m, so it's 1/3. And then x minus negative 5. Good? Okay, so you should have, previous to this class, learned how to not have to work with fractions. There's a shortcut so that we don't have to distribute 1/3. Okay, so this is your shortcut if you forgot. Okay, so what we do is whatever is on top gets distributed to the right side, and then whatever is on the bottom gets distributed to the left side. Okay. All right, so if I were to distribute 3 to y, 3 times y is going to be 3y. These guys are going to change to a positive. If I distribute 3 to a positive 3, that's going to be a positive 9. Okay, then my numerator going to the right side, well, 1 times x is just 1x. These change to positive, 1 times 5 is just going to be 5. And you only do that when you have a fraction. So say 2 is on the top, then you have 2x plus 10. Okay, they wanted standard. So what do I gotta do? So x to the other side. So it's going to become a negative 1x. So that moves over. Got a negative 1x. The y stays the same, so it's 3y. That's my last step. Subtract 9. So when I subtract 9 over the other side, it's going to make it a negative 4. So again, multiple choice, it'd be a positive x minus 3y equals positive 4. When you go to do the multiple choice, they might have it switched. Okay, so that. Okay, so I'm going to give you the notes. We'll cross off the ones that you've already done. You'll try the rest, and then we'll grade that tomorrow along with your review before the test.